I didn't know my life was about to split in half that morning. Not when I canceled the restaurant reservation, not when I requested the spa refund, not even when I accepted the cancellation fee on the Coastal Hotel without blinking. Money was the least painful thing I was about to lose. The email confirmations stacked neatly in my inbox, each one a quiet goodbye to the birthday weekend I had planned for my husband, Felix. 3 months of preparation, 12 guests, a surprise he'd been bragging about to his coworkers before it even happened, all gone with a few calm clicks. At exactly 8:07 a.m., Felix walked into the kitchen. Perfect posture, tailored suit, that expensive cologne that always lingered long after he left, long enough for another woman to smell it on him, I realized. "Morning," he said casually, already scrolling through his phone. "Morning," I replied, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Happy birthday." He paused, just for a fraction of a second. Not long enough for most people to notice, but I had spent months studying his micro-expressions. "Big day," he said lightly. "You seem relaxed." "I am." Something in my tone must have triggered his instincts. Felix had good instincts. He just used them to hide lies instead of confronting them. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Oh, nothing," I smiled. "You might want to check your calendar." His fingers moved fast. Too fast. First, the restaurant cancellation. His brows pulled together. Then, the spa refund. His jaw tightened. Then, the hotel booking. His face drained of color. "What did you do?" he demanded. "Me?" I set my mug down gently. "Nothing dramatic. I just thought we should celebrate differently this year." "Differently how?" "Intimately," I said. "Just you. Alone. No coworkers, no distractions, no work wives." The silence was deafening. "You canceled everything?" he snapped. "Not everything," I said calmly. "I kept one reservation." His eyes narrowed. "Which one?" I looked straight at him. "Dinner tonight, Denny's. Table for one." His face flushed red with rage. "You're insane," he hissed. "This is my birthday." "I know," I said softly. "I'm sure Brenda will comfort you." That name landed like a grenade. Felix grabbed his keys and stormed toward the garage. "When I get home," he shouted, "you better have fixed this." I smiled as the door slammed. I hadn't ruined his birthday. I had just stopped funding my own humiliation. And this was only the beginning. I'm Alexandra Mercer. I'm 38 years old. And for most of my marriage, people thought I was lucky. Felix and I met 12 years ago at a networking event in downtown Seattle. I wasn't even supposed to be there. A colleague had bailed last minute, and I went out of obligation, not expectation. Felix noticed me immediately, not because I was loud or flashy, but because I wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was already successful back then, charismatic, well-dressed, confident in that smooth, practiced way men develop when they're used to being admired. An advertising executive climbing fast, always surrounded by people who laughed a second too late at his jokes. I was the opposite, quiet, observant, a cybersecurity analyst who preferred patterns to people and truth to charm. I worked remotely even back then, long before it became fashionable. I listened more than I spoke. I remembered things others forgot. Felix called me grounding. I called him exciting. That should have been my first warning. We dated for 3 years before he proposed. He did it right, classic, public, applause from strangers at a restaurant he knew I liked. He slipped the ring onto my finger with shaking hands and whispered, "You're the only person who's ever seen the real me." I believed him. The first few years of marriage were good. Not perfect, but real. We learned each other's rhythms. He worked long hours, I worked strange ones. We had dinners together when we could, weekends away when schedules aligned. No children, not because we didn't want them, but because later always seemed more convenient. Felix's career exploded around year 5. New clients, new responsibilities, new coworkers, mostly younger, mostly impressed, mostly eager to be noticed by the man who signed off on campaigns and bonuses. He started traveling more. Late meetings became routine. Work dinners became normal. And slowly, subtly, I became invisible. Not ignored, worse, taken for granted. I handled the logistics of our life: bills, scheduling, planning vacations, remembering birthdays. I knew his preferences so well I could order for him without asking. I became efficient at loving him. He became careless with being faithful. At first, the signs were small. A phone turned face down. A smile at a message he wouldn't explain. Colleagues he mentioned too often. One name in particular. Brenda. Work wife, Felix joked once, laughing like it was harmless. I laughed too. That was mistake number one. His family adored him. His mother often told me how lucky I was. His sister praised his ambition. No one ever asked how I was doing, only how he was managing stress, pressure, responsibility. The unspoken rule was clear. Support the man, don't question the system. So I didn't. I swallowed discomfort. I rationalized distance. I told myself every marriage had phases, that loyalty meant patience, that love meant endurance. What I didn't realize, what I couldn't admit yet, was that while I was busy protecting our marriage, Felix was already living outside of it. And the worst part? He assumed I'd never notice. The human brain is remarkable at self-deception, especially when the truth threatens to dismantle a life you've spent years building. For a long time, I didn't suspect Felix. I adjusted to him. When he stopped coming home before 9, I ate alone. When he canceled weekend plans, I reorganized mine. When his phone became an extension of his hand, I pretended not to notice. I told myself I was being mature, understanding, secure. In reality, I was training myself not to ask questions. The first real crack appeared on an ordinary Tuesday night. Felix came home close to midnight, smelling like wine and unfamiliar perfume. Not cheap, not overpowering, carefully chosen. The kind of scent someone wears when they expect to be remembered. You working late? I asked, not looking up from my laptop. Client dinner, he said quickly. Too quickly. I nodded. Later, when he showered, I noticed his jacket hanging on the chair. I reached into the pocket to hang it properly, and my fingers brushed against a receipt. A restaurant downtown, 2 entrees, 1 dessert, 1 bottle of wine. The total was more than we usually spent on our anniversary dinners. I folded the receipt back exactly as I found it. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was angry, but because something inside me had shifted. A quiet recalibration. A part of my brain that analyzed threats for a living had finally woken up. After that, the signs came faster. His calendar stopped syncing to the shared tablet in the kitchen. Our joint credit card statements showed charges that didn't align with his travel schedule. Gas purchases near neighborhoods he had no reason to be in. And then there was the iPad. Felix loved gadgets but hated organization. He left his devices everywhere, logged into everything, assuming no one would ever look. One evening, as I wiped the counter, his tablet lit up. A message preview. Can't stop thinking about last night. The sender's name wasn't saved. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I started observing, listening, noticing patterns. Felix stopped talking about work in general and started talking about Brenda specifically. Brenda's ideas, Brenda's frustrations, Brenda's humor, Brenda's late nights. The intimacy was subtle, but unmistakable. I also noticed how his family shifted. His sister began making comments about how men have needs. His mother hinted that I should try harder to keep my husband interested. No one said the word cheating, but everyone was circling something. One afternoon, I ran into our neighbor, Mrs. Klein, while checking the mail. She smiled kindly, then hesitated. "Your husband has a friend who visits often," she said casually. "Nice car. Very shiny." My stomach tightened. "Oh," I said. "Yes, comes by during the day sometimes. Leaves through the back gate. I thought maybe you knew." I smiled politely and thanked her. I did know. Just not the way she thought. By the time Felix forgot my birthday entirely, until his assistant reminded him, I understood something important. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being prepared. And when the truth finally showed itself, I wouldn't look away. There's a moment when suspicion turns into certainty. It's not loud. It doesn't arrive with dramatic music or a sudden scream. It settles into your chest quietly, heavy, permanent, irreversible. For me, that moment came on a Thursday night, 3 weeks before Felix's birthday. He had fallen asleep on the couch again, fully dressed, his phone resting loosely in his hand. The TV glowed silently in front of him, some news anchor frozen mid-sentence. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching him breathe. I didn't feel rage. I felt detached, like a scientist standing over an experiment that had finally produced results. His phone buzzed. Once, then again. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to, because the iPad on the kitchen counter lit up at the same time. Same message. Same sender. Same words. I miss the way you touch me when she's asleep. My hands went cold. I picked up the tablet slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter the moment. The screen unlocked without resistance. Felix had never bothered setting a passcode. Dozens of messages loaded. Weeks. Months. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we ate breakfast together every morning, and started reading. They didn't bother with subtlety anymore. They joked about meetings that turned into hotel rooms, about using work trips as cover, about how clueless I was. Brenda joked once that I was sweet but background noise. Felix didn't correct her. One message stopped my breath entirely. Can't wait to feel you inside me again. Alex is working late. We'll have all night. I stared at those words until they blurred, not because they were graphic, but because they were casual. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a routine. I heard Felix shift on the couch. I locked the tablet and placed it back exactly where it had been. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't wake him. Instead, I went into the bathroom, closed the door, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked calm. That scared me more than anger ever could. Later that night, Felix crawled into bed and wrapped an arm around me like nothing had happened. His breathing slowed. He slept easily. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every excuse, every late night, and something inside me hardened. By morning, I wasn't confused. I was clear. Felix wasn't just betraying me, he was counting on my silence. And that was the moment I decided I would no longer protect him from the consequences of his own choices. The morning after I read those messages, I made Felix breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, exactly the way he liked it. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't crack. I kissed his cheek before he left for work. And that was the moment I understood something terrifying about myself. I could still perform love even after it had died. Felix sat across from me, scrolling through his phone, smiling at something I didn't ask about. His tie was slightly crooked. I reached out and fixed it for him out of habit. He smiled. "You're quiet today," he said. "Just thinking," I replied. "About what?" "About how long you've been lying to my face. About how easily you sleep next to me. About how you call betrayal a routine." But I didn't say any of that. "I've been tired lately," I said instead. He nodded, already distracted, already gone. When the garage door closed behind him, I sat down at the table and let the silence wash over me. This was the part people never talk about, the moment after discovery, when you don't explode, don't confront, don't cry hysterically. You just reevaluate. I asked myself all the wrong questions first. Was I not enough? Did I stop trying? Did I miss something obvious? I replayed arguments that never happened, conversations we never finished, intimacy that slowly turned into obligation. I examined my own reflection with brutal honesty. Then I stopped, because there was another question, quieter, but far more important. Why was I taking responsibility for choices I didn't make? Felix hadn't come to me. He hadn't asked for counseling. He hadn't even had the decency to be careful. He had chosen deception because it was easier than honesty. That afternoon, I did something I had never done in our entire marriage. I stopped covering for him. When his mother called to ask why he'd missed a family dinner the night before, I didn't invent an excuse. I said, You should ask Felix. When his sister texted about planning his birthday surprise, I replied, I've handled everything. Which was true. I also stopped engaging emotionally. When Felix came home that evening and complained about work, I listened, but I didn't soothe. I didn't validate. I didn't offer solutions. He noticed. You okay? He asked later, lying beside me in bed. I'm fine, I said. It wasn't a lie. I wasn't broken. I was withdrawing. The first confrontation came 2 days later. Felix reached for me in the kitchen, casual, possessive. I stepped back without thinking. What's that about? He asked, frowning. I don't feel like being touched right now. He stared at me, offended. Since when? Since I started listening to my instincts. Something flickered across his face. Guilt? Fear? Recognition? It vanished quickly. You're being dramatic, he said. You've been weird all week. I met his eyes. Have I? For the first time in months, he didn't have an answer. That night, I lay awake again, but this time I wasn't hurting. I was planning. Because reacting emotionally would have given him power, and I was done handing it over so easily. The shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in through phone calls, casual comments, and concerned looks that weren't really concerned at all. Felix noticed my distance before anyone else did. He just didn't understand it. He started compensating, overcorrecting in public, performing affection when others were around, a hand on my back at dinner, a smile held a second too long at family gatherings, loud compliments that sounded rehearsed. Alexandra's been so supportive lately, he told his parents one Sunday afternoon. I smiled politely. His mother nodded approvingly. That's good. A man needs peace at home. Peace. Not honesty, not respect, just silence. A few days later, his sister called me directly. I'm worried about Felix, she said. He's under a lot of pressure at work. Maybe you've been distant? There it was. The reframing. Felix wasn't unfaithful. He was stressed. And I was failing him. I didn't argue. I thanked her for her concern and ended the call. That night, Felix confronted me in the living room. You've been talking to my family, he said sharply. They've been talking to me. What did you tell them? The truth, I replied calmly, which is that you should speak for yourself. He laughed, but it was brittle. You're being passive-aggressive. No, I said, I'm being accurate. The tension escalated after that. Felix stopped hiding his irritation. He criticized small things. How I loaded the dishwasher, how I responded to texts, how I never smiled anymore. He accused me of pulling away without explanation. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. Then came the escalation I hadn't expected. Brenda. Felix started mentioning her openly. Brenda thinks you're overreacting, Felix said one evening, as if that opinion mattered. Oh, I replied. Interesting. He says couples go through phases, that I shouldn't let you sabotage my career over mood swings. Mood swings. I looked at Felix then, really looked at him. You discuss our marriage with the woman you're sleeping with? His face froze. You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. I know exactly what I'm talking about. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. You're imagining things. You've always been paranoid. Gaslighting. Textbook. That was when I stopped doubting myself entirely. The following week, the financial red flags multiplied. Charges on our joint credit card, restaurants I'd never been to, hotels booked during conferences, gas purchases near Brenda's apartment complex, at hours Felix was supposedly in meetings. I printed everything. Dates, times, amounts. I didn't confront him. I documented him. Felix mistook my silence for surrender. On the morning of his birthday, when he watched his plans collapse one by one on his phone, he finally realized something was wrong. But even then, he didn't apologize. He demanded compliance. And when I didn't give it, he panicked. By noon, he'd called me 17 times. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages evolved quickly. Anger, bargaining, threats. The last one made me laugh out loud. If you don't fix this, he said, I'm staying with Stacy until you come to your senses. Stacy, the woman who had been covering for him for months. I set my phone down and went into the garage. Felix thought he was clever, but he had underestimated one thing. I wasn't just his wife. I was a cybersecurity analyst who specialized in patterns, digital footprints, and people who believed they were smarter than they actually were, and he had made too many mistakes. That night, after Felix threatened to leave, the house felt unfamiliar, not empty, occupied by absence. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching things we had chosen together. The couch where we once stayed up laughing until 2 a.m., the framed photo from our first anniversary, when we still looked at each other like partners instead of obstacles. The guest room that had quietly become his excuse. I fell asleep working. I sat on the edge of our bed and finally let myself stop doing. No planning, no analyzing, no strategizing, just feeling. The weight hit all at once. Not rage, grief. Grief for the woman I had been when I trusted without checking. Grief for the marriage I defended long after it had stopped defending me. Grief for the version of Felix I thought I knew, the man who once promised to protect me, not embarrass me. I replayed his messages with Brenda again in my head, not because I needed proof anymore, but because my mind kept searching for a moment where it could have been different. There wasn't one. I curled into myself on the bed, hands wrapped around my ribs like I could hold myself together physically if I tried hard enough. My chest ached, not sharply, but constantly, like something vital had been removed and my body hadn't adjusted yet. For the first time, a dangerous thought crept in. What if I walk away and lose everything anyway? Felix had the louder voice, the wider network, the family that already believed I was the problem, the colleagues who saw him as charming and me as background support. What if he painted me as unstable? What if people believed him? I checked no messages from him, none from his family. Only one notification. Mrs. Klein, our elderly neighbor, had sent a text. "Dear, I hope you're okay. I saw that man's car again today. The BMW. Same one as before." My throat tightened. Someone else had seen it. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't alone in reality, only in marriage. That realization hurt and healed at the same time. I lay there until the house grew quiet enough to hear the rain against the roof. Seattle rain. Steady, unapologetic, cleansing without asking permission. And somewhere in that stillness, something inside me shifted again, not into anger, into resolve. I whispered it out loud, just to hear it exist. I will not beg for honesty. I wiped my face, stood up, and looked at myself in the mirror. Red eyes, pale skin, but steady. Felix had spent months dismantling our marriage quietly. I would not dismantle myself loudly. This wasn't the end. It was the moment before the truth stopped being private. Power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it slips into your life quietly, through a text message, a careless assumption, or someone else's fear. Mine arrived the morning after Felix's birthday. I was in the garage, pretending to organize tools, when my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Hi, Alex. This is Nina, Stacy's friend. Felix mentioned you might be free tonight since your plans fell through. Want to grab a drink?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. So that was the play. A soft landing. A distraction. A setup. Felix and Stacy weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to control the narrative, to provoke me into a mistake, to make me look reckless, emotional, unstable. The wronged husband stereotype, except I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a woman who understood systems, and systems always leave traces. I replied calmly. "Sure. Where?" Her answer came quickly. "Morrison's bar on Pine Street, 8 o'clock. Of course. Neutral ground. Public, familiar." I smiled and immediately called Pete, my only real friend and the owner of that bar. "They're sending bait," I told him. Pete laughed. "You want me to shut it down?" "No," I said. "I want cameras, audio, and I want her to know they're running." "That's legal," he said. "My bar posted surveillance notices." "Good." By the time I walked into Morrison's that night, I wasn't nervous. I was focused. Nina was already there. Late 20s, polished, beautiful in a way that felt intentional. She stood as I approached, smile wide, hand extended. "Alex, thank you for meeting me." We talked. I let her lead. She asked about my marriage, about Felix, about money. I watched her technique, sympathy layered with curiosity, concern wrapped around calculation. She touched my hand at the right moments, leaned in at the right times, asked the same question in different ways, and eventually she reached it. "So, are you going to be okay financially?" she asked softly. I sighed, just enough. "I've been preparing," I said, "moving assets, protecting myself." Her eyes sharpened. "Assets?" I nodded. "Offshore accounts, crypto, things Felix doesn't know about." It was all fiction, but Nina didn't know that. She leaned forward, fascinated. "That's smart. How much are we talking?" I waited a beat, enough to disappear. Her phone buzzed shortly after. She glanced at it and smiled again, too quickly. That was when I ended it. "How much is Felix paying you?" I asked. The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you mean." "You've asked about money 7 times, I said evenly. "You showed up on my husband's birthday. You picked this bar. So I'll ask again. How much?" She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "I should go." "Tell Felix thanks," I said calmly. "His real birthday surprise already happened." She left without looking back. Pete met me at the bar, phone in hand, grinning. Every word he said, and she was texting someone the whole time. I took the video file and walked home in the rain, something light and unfamiliar in my chest. Clarity. The next morning, Felix came home looking destroyed, and before he could speak, his phone rang. "Stacy." "Alex," she said when I answered. "There's a problem. Someone posted screenshots, Felix and Brenda's messages, on the agency's internal Slack. Everyone has seen them." I looked at Felix. His face collapsed. "What kind of messages?" I asked. "The kind that end careers." I hung up. Felix whispered, "You did this." "No," I said calmly. "I just stopped protecting you." And in that moment, the truth finally stopped being mine alone. The collapse didn't come with drama. It came with notifications. Felix stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, watching his world unravel one vibration at a time. Messages stacked faster than he could read them. Coworkers, clients, supervisors. Some confused, some furious, some eerily silent. Silence is always the worst sign. "What did they see?" he asked hoarsely. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Not defensive, just done. "Everything," I said. "Months of messages, dates, jokes, plans. You didn't even bother to be discreet." His phone rang again. "Brenda." Felix stared at the screen like it might bite him. "Don't answer," I said calmly. "I have to." "No," I replied. "You want to. There's a difference." He let it ring out. By noon, the screenshots had escaped the agency's Slack channel. Someone, probably younger, angrier, and far less forgiving, had sent them to a local gossip blog. By evening, social media had done what it always does best: amplified, archived, immortalized. Felix's name trended locally alongside words like unprofessional, abuse of power, workplace misconduct. By Monday morning, HR called. By Wednesday, he was placed on administrative leave. Brenda didn't last that long. She tried to meet me in a parking garage, desperate, disheveled, 5 years older than she'd been a week earlier. She accused me of ruining her life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten her. I told her the truth. "You gambled your career on someone else's marriage," I said, "and you lost." She swung at me. I stepped aside. Concrete is unforgiving. By Friday, Brenda was terminated. Officially. Quietly. Permanently. Felix moved in with Stacy that night. His family called once. Just once. Not to apologize. To ask if I'd considered how damaging this was to Felix. I told them I had. Extensively. The divorce papers were filed the following Wednesday. No screaming, no theatrics, no begging. Felix tried once. "You didn't have to destroy me," he said. I met his eyes. "I didn't destroy you," I replied. I stopped lying for you. That was the last real conversation we had. When he packed his things, I didn't watch. I listened from upstairs. The sound of drawers opening, boxes closing, footsteps retreating. When the doors shut, the house exhaled.
So did I.
I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Because the truth doesn't need revenge. It just needs daylight. 6 months later, my life looked nothing like the one I had fought so hard to preserve. I no longer lived in the house where I learned to swallow my instincts. I sold it quietly and moved into a downtown condo overlooking Elliott Bay. Glass, light, security, and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't accuse you, the kind that heals. Felix was gone. Not just from my home, but from my mental landscape. He moved cities, changed jobs, changed stories. People like him always do. Reinvention is easier than accountability. Brenda disappeared too. Different state, different firm. Same reputation following her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. I didn't keep tabs on them. I didn't need to. What surprised me most wasn't how quickly the chaos ended, but how much peace arrived once I stopped participating in the lie. For years, I thought strength meant endurance, that loyalty meant silence, that love meant self-erasure. I was wrong. Strength is knowing when to stop carrying someone else's shame. Loyalty without truth is just self-betrayal. And love that requires you to shrink is not love. It's control. On what would have been Felix's next birthday, I made a reservation at an absurdly expensive restaurant in whatever city I happened to be visiting. And then I canceled it. Some habits die hard, but this time I smiled while I did it. Because the lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about refusal. Refusing to be gaslit. Refusing to protect lies. Refusing to mistake quiet for weak. I didn't win because I was smarter. I won because I finally listened to myself. And if there's one thing I know now, one thing I would tell any woman watching this, the moment you stop explaining your pain to someone committed to misunderstanding it is the moment you start getting your life back. Sometimes the strongest ending is simply walking away with your dignity intact and your future finally your own.